The Pentagon
were
Papers.
7,000 highly classified documents regarding the Vietnam War that were leaked to the public in 1971 by the infamous Daniel Ellsberg.
Daniel Ellsberg, born in 1931, was an educated Harvard University graduate. In 1954, Ellsberg left his studies at Harvard University to join the U.S. Marine Corps. In a class of 1,100 lieutenants, Dan graduated first. He then served 2 years in the Marines as a platoon leader and company commander. He was discharged in 1957 as a first lieutenant.
He then picked up his studies at Harvard, but after 2 years he left his studies again to work at Rand Corporation, focusing on nuclear strategy. In 1962, he received his PhD in economics from Harvard University.
He worked for the Pentagon in 1964 under Robert McNamara. He then served in Vietnam until 1967 when he resumed his work at Rand, studying top-secret classified documents about the Vietnam War. These documents became known as
The Pentagon Papers.
I thought then, and I think more now than before, that documents had a power to be taken seriously and to attract attention that nothing else did.
After his immense amount of work on the Pentagon Papers, Daniel began to believe that these secrets should become known to the public. Slowly, day by day, Daniel would stuff several volumes of the papers into his briefcase, slip them past security, and take them home to make Xerox copies of over 7,000 pages of these classified top-secret documents.
And I thought, all right, I have in my safe thousands of pages of documents that give the lie to this pattern of deception. I'm not going to be part of this system of lying anymore.
After completing the grueling task of copying 7,000 classified pages of documents with the help of his wife and kids, he handed them over to the New York Times reporter Neil Sheehan in March of 1971.
I walked into this hotel room when he and I holed up, and Neil says, "Rick, look at what we've got." And I mean, it was just staggering.
Neil and Hedrick had before them
The Pentagon Papers.
They knew that they couldn't handle these documents in the New York Times building, so a group of publishers rented out a suite so they could privately analyze the documents.
Once analyzed, it was time for the press to decide whether or not to publish anything from these top-secret government documents. They took a risk and decided to go ahead and begin printing. The first article was published on June 13, 1971. In the article was published one of the most startling sentences in all of the papers.
The debate over the Vietnam War increased significantly and gave fuel to the anti-war enthusiasts. Was America risking the lives of young Americans just to save its face?
The government had immediately taken action the day after the publication of the first installment of the articles, and had sent a letter to the New York Times demanding that they stop publishing
The Pentagon Papers.
right away.
Monday was a very interesting day. I came back to the New York Times, hustled on the elevator, went up to the top executive floor. There was the biggest shouting argument I ever heard in my life. A telegram that had come from John Mitchell, Nixon's Attorney General. The telegram said, "We want you to stop publication immediately, and if you don't, we're going to take appropriate action." I mean, what in God's name have we been fighting for in this country for 200 or 300 years, to have the right to speak and the right to publish, the right to think against a threat by the government, if all we're going to do is give it all up because someone sends you a telegram?
The New York Times was being told by Nixon's Attorney General to cease publication, a basic right given to them in the Constitution stating freedom of the press.
Following these actions came the debate over whether the press can publish top-secret government documents known as
The Pentagon Papers.
The information contained in
The Pentagon Papers.
the study had the potential to turn around all actions in Vietnam. The people reading the New York Times may turn even further against the government, resulting in riots, outrages, and temper tantrums. Furthering the potential, the lies exposed could end the war altogether.
The government could not stop them. The Times refused. The government then took the New York Times to the Supreme Court. Eventually, the Times won their case.
In one of the most important judicial decisions in the history of the country, the Supreme Court today ruled that the New York Times and the Washington Post may continue to publish the secret Pentagon Papers.
The ruling was amazingly simple. It was that proving the need for prior censorship is a heavy burden, and the government didn't meet that burden.
The decision was a great one. The story today is what the Constitution of this country means to us. I've never appreciated what the meaning and importance of separation of powers is so much as in the last week.
Now the government had Ellsberg to deal with. A high-ranking man from inside the Pentagon had handed in
The Pentagon Papers.
to a media outlet for the entire world to read about. What was to be done with him? On June 28, 1971, Ellsberg handed himself over to officials in Boston. He was taken believing that he would spend the rest of his life in prison, being charged with theft, conspiracy, and espionage. But was he truly guilty?
And I left the auditorium and I found a men's room that was deserted, sat on the tile floor just sobbing, hysterically crying, just sobbing for a long time, for over an hour. And I had these various thoughts, but one of the thoughts was the best thing that the best young men of our country can do is go to prison. When I heard you say these words, I'm going to prison, it was as if an axe had split my head. But what had really happened was that my life had split in two. And it was my life after those words that I've lived ever since.
Nixon wanted Ellsberg to pay.
Just say that we've got to keep our eye on the main ball. The main ball's Ellsberg. We got to get this son of a bitch.
Much to Nixon's dismay, the charges against Ellsberg were dropped. He was free.
Good evening. A federal judge in Los Angeles today declared a mistrial in the Pentagon Papers case. He dismissed all the charges against Daniel Ellsberg and Anthony Russo. The judge ruled that the government had so tainted its own case as to make a fair trial impossible.
The Pentagon Papers left behind a trail of disaster. It humiliated Nixon and his administration and also gave answers to secrets that occurred during the administrations of Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. The Pentagon Paper event also indirectly led to the Watergate scandal and ultimately Nixon's resignation. The power of documents had been unleashed.